Happy Tuesday, everybody. Felicia here. Thanks, you guys, for tuning in for another edition of Positive Tea with V. And we are here again for Black History Month, Part 2. And the importance of celebrating our history is something that goes back even before Black history was recognized in America, in our schools, and taught to our children. Black history is something that started from our origin. And it's so important, like we mentioned last week, to keep understanding and appreciating and acknowledging Blackness, not just for us as African Americans, not just for me, not just for you, but for all of us. And it's so important to understand our history and the different sections of people who devoted their lives to making things reflect integrity, leadership, and determination, and love as well. So, last week we talked about how Black history was reflected through the lives of so many people over the course of the years, even back in the 19th century. And last week we were able to reflect on a very, very important individual, Frederick Douglass, and he actually had a birthday yesterday. His birthday is on Valentine's Day. And he was one of the conquerors, the survivors, and a wonderful example of an activist, not just in civil rights, but in humanity. And we're going to watch a clip now and get into another very important individual who has shaped our history, shaped American history, shaped history for us as women, Black people, and the human race just in general. And her name is Maya Angelou. So we're going to watch a very short clip, and I will see you after that.
Maybe the hardest part is if if you teach, you have to live your teaching. You can't say you do not as I do, but do as I say. No, no. You have to say I'm doing my best to live what I teach. I have a painting by Phoebe of a group that she calls Sister Suki's Funeral. And all the women, there are about 9 women, and they all look like women in my grandmother's prayer meeting group. So whenever I'm obliged to do something, I take that painting and I look at that painting. There's an empty chair. And I think, now, what would Grandma do? What would she say? I can almost hear her voice say, now, sister, you know what's right. Just do right. You don't really have to ask anybody. The truth is, right may not be expedient. It may not be profitable, but it will satisfy your soul. It brings you the kind of protection that bodyguards can't give you. Try to be all you can be, to be the best human being you can be. Try to be that in your church, in your temple. Try to be that in your classroom. Do it because it is right to do. You see, people will know you, and they will add their prayers to your life.
So, in looking there and listening to Maya Angelou, as you look at the video, she being a part of history, giving tribute to somebody who was instrumental in her life, and that was her grandmother. Some people may not know, but Maya Angelou was raised the majority of the first part of her life by her grandmother. And her grandmother is actually, she was actually from Arkansas. So Maya Angelou is actually, she lived a great portion of the beginning of her life in Arkansas. And to see someone that I think so highly of, and so many of us carbon copy ourselves behind, reflect on her grandmother and someone who taught her and instilled wisdom in her is amazing. And it was also amazing for me growing up, the times where I saw Oprah, who is someone that is another one of my role models. Paint Maya Angelou is not just someone that she admired, but someone who she actually felt like was a friend, an icon, a legend. And it's so wonderful throughout history that those people that we look up to, those people who had such a pertinent role in our existence as African Americans, and as people and as the human race, they saw the importance of history, and the positive hand me downs did not stop with them. It's carried on in their legacy. So now we're going to get into depths of Maya Angelou and a lot of her accomplishments and pay tribute to her life and the contributions that she's made throughout that time. I want to remind everybody that these are clips from YouTube, Podcast 49 and Positive Tea with Fee. We do not own the rights to any of the music or the productions from these channels. Please enjoy the tribute to Maya Angelou.
Maya Angelou overcame more than her fair share of hardship to become one of the most influential and popular authors in American history. This is the tragic and ultimately triumphant real-life story of Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou was born Marguerite Annie Johnson in St. Louis, Missouri on April 4, 1928. For the first years of her life, she was raised in California, but at the age of 3, her parents separated and essentially mailed her to her grandmother in Arkansas. She told NPR, "They put me and my brother on a train without any companionship, without any adult, put tags on our arms and said, 'This child should be delivered to Miss Annie Henderson in Stamps, Arkansas.'" Angelou credits her grandmother for raising her, but when she was just 7 years old, things took a tragic turn. During a trip to St. Louis to visit her mother, Angelou was sexually assaulted by her mother's boyfriend. She told her brother, who told the family, who had the man arrested. When he got off with just a single day in jail, though, someone took the law into their own hands and murdered him in retaliation. Angelou withdrew into herself, convinced that saying the man's name had led to his death. She believed her voice to be, quote, "a killing machine."
And I thought, my voice killed that man.
She became mute, not speaking a word for 5 years. Instead, she turned to reading and literature, memorizing all the poetry she could find. She later told Smithsonian, "I believe that my brain reconstructed itself during those years. I believe that the areas in the brain which provide and promote physical speech had nothing to do, and so I've been able to develop a memory quite unusual, which has allowed me to learn languages, really quite a few." When Angelou and her brother became teenagers, her grandmother decided it was too dangerous for them to remain in the South, so she sent them to live with their mother in Oakland, California. Angelou studied acting and dance, but at the age of 16, she became pregnant. Determined to finish her education, she hid it from her mother until after her high school graduation. After giving birth to her only son, Guy Johnson, Angelou moved out of the house and struck out on her own, working odd jobs to support herself and her son. She soon also began a relationship with an older married man who was deep in debt from gambling. Promising to marry her once he had the money, he convinced Angelou to work in a brothel in order to pay off his debt. Though the experience wasn't one Angelou was proud of, she also wasn't ashamed to speak or write about it, recounting the whole experience in her 1974 memoir, Gathered Together in My Name. She told NPR, "Children need to know you can stumble and fumble and fall. See where you are and get up. Forgive yourself and go on about the business of living your life." In the 1950s, Angelou turned her attention to her dance career and began performing in clubs around San Francisco. She also took modern dance classes where she met famed dancer Alvin Ailey. The pair teamed up for a short time, dancing together as Al and Rita, but their act never took off. Angelou and her husband Tosh Angelos moved to New York City, where she studied African dance for 1 year under the famed choreographer Pearl Primus, before returning to San Francisco. After divorcing Angelos, she began performing cabaret and dancing calypso at the Purple Onion. It was there that she officially took on the stage name Maya Angelou, combining her childhood nickname with the last name of her former husband. The newly christened Maya Angelou's stage career started to take off. From 1954 to 1955, she toured throughout Europe and Africa with a production of Porgy and Bess. After returning to America, she performed in the off-Broadway show Calypso Heatwave, which was turned into a film.
Miss Calypso herself, Maya Angelou!
Angelou also began recording her Calypso music performances, releasing her first album of music titled Miss Calypso in 1957. While Angelou was performing in clubs around California, she met many influential artists and writers, including Langston Hughes, and novelist and activist John Oliver Killens. In 1959, Killens suggested she should move to New York permanently and, quote, come find out if you really are a writer. Angelou, who later described herself as, quote, young enough and silly enough to take him up on his offer, moved to New York City, joined the Harlem Writers Guild, and began publishing her first pieces of writing. A year later, Angelou met Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and began immersing herself in the fight for racial equality, using her remarkable writing talents to raise funds for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Angelou, with actors Godfrey MacArthur Cambridge and Hugh Hurd, wrote and co-produced Cabaret for Freedom. The show raised so much money that Angelou was appointed the new director of SCLC's New York office, where she worked closely with King to organize and raise funds. Throwing herself into the global civil rights movement, Angelou began a relationship with a South African freedom fighter. Along with Angelou's son, the couple moved to Cairo, Egypt, to continue the fight against apartheid. While living in Egypt, Angelou wrote for a weekly radical newspaper called the Arab Observer. After the relationship ended in 1962, Angelou decided to move to Ghana, where her son planned to attend college. However, just 3 days after their arrival in the country, he broke his neck in a car accident. Luckily, he made a remarkable recovery and was eventually able to go on to attend college, while Angelou began working for the magazine The African Review as a features editor. Angelou continued fighting for civil rights even while living abroad, immersing herself in the African-American expatriate community there. During King's historic March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom in 1963, she still participated, marching outside the American Embassy in Accra in solidarity. She also became close with activists and writers like W.E.B. Du Bois and Julian Mayfield. And somehow, Angelou also found time to teach at the University of Ghana's School of Music and Drama and do freelance work for the Ghanaian Times and Radio Ghana. It was also during her time in Ghana that she became close with another expatriate living there, civil rights leader Malcolm X. In 1965, Angelou returned to America to help Malcolm X create his new Organization of African American Unity. Shortly after returning to the United States, Angelou was devastated when Malcolm X was assassinated. She briefly moved to Hawaii, then to Los Angeles, where she witnessed the Watts riots. Finally, she returned to New York, where she poured her restlessness into her writing. In 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. approached Angelou and asked her to organize a new march. She agreed, but before the march could happen, King was assassinated on Angelou's 40th birthday. For many years after, she refused to celebrate her birthday, instead visiting King's widow, Coretta Scott King, on the anniversary. That year, she also wrote, produced, and narrated the groundbreaking 10-part documentary series Blacks, Blues, Black, about the connection between blues music and Africa. Inspired by her work and her incredible life, writer James Baldwin and editor Robert Loomis began encouraging and then challenging her to write an autobiography. Although she was reluctant at first, she eventually decided to try her hand at memoir writing, and the result was her acclaimed 1969 autobiography, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. While Maya Angelou might be best known as a poet and influential memoirist, she also had a groundbreaking career in film and TV. Following the success of her series Blacks, Blues, Black, she wrote the screenplay and soundtrack for the big screen drama Georgia, Georgia in 1972. According to Poetry Foundation, this made her the first African-American woman to have a screenplay produced. It also gave her the opportunity to become one of the first African-American women to join the Directors Guild of America, though she wouldn't make her official directorial debut until she filmed Down in the Delta in 1998 at the age of 70. Besides writing, producing, and directing, Angelou also returned to acting. In 1977, she had a supporting role in the groundbreaking miniseries Roots. And 2 years later, she adapted her famous autobiography, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, into a television movie. She continued to act in films like Poetic Justice and How to Make an American Quilt well into her 70s, making her final film appearance in Tyler Perry's 2006 comedy film, Medea's Family Reunion. In 1981, tragedy struck Maya Angelou's family. At the time, Angelou's son Guy Johnson had one child of his own, a son named Colin. On April 13, 1981, Johnson's ex-wife Sharon Murphy picked Colin up for her monthly visitation, but she never brought the boy back home. For the next 4 years, Johnson and Angelou had no contact with Colin, and there was no lead to his whereabouts, or even if he was still alive. The stress took a toll on Johnson's health, aggravating his old neck injury so badly that he was briefly paralyzed from the neck down. Calcium deposits and blood clots had weakened his spine so badly that he was unable to walk, and he had to undergo multiple surgeries. Johnson, however, was determined to make a full recovery and see his son again, telling the Los Angeles Times, "When I have my son back, I want him to see me fine." Angelou and Johnson never stopped searching, spending thousands of dollars investigating the disappearance. On May 29, 1985, they caught a break when an acquaintance of Murphy's contacted Angelou, giving her Murphy's and Colin's location in Austin, Texas. Angelou contacted the authorities, and Murphy eventually agreed to meet. The arranged meeting took place at the home of Angelou's attorney in Austin, and on June 6, 1985, over 4 years after she'd last laid eyes on him, Angelou was finally able to bring her grandson home. In 1973, Maya Angelou returned to the South for the first time since her childhood to speak at Wake Forest University in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. She had refused to return to the South for most of her life, writing in Ebony, "I knew my heart would break if ever I put my foot down on that soil, moist still with old hurts." Eventually, though, she realized that by avoiding her feelings about the South, it was becoming an ever-growing presence in her mind. She wrote that she needed to, quote, "face the fear, loathing at its source, or it would consume me whole." In 1981, she was offered the Reynolds Professorship of American Studies at Wake Forest, and she accepted. When she first arrived, she was one of only a few African-American professors on staff, but she wanted to change minds, including her own. Having found yet another fulfilling calling, Angelou was an active part of the Wake Forest academic community, teaching courses on a variety of subjects, including world poetry and dramatic performance, African culture and impact on U.S., and Shakespeare and the human condition. In 2008, Angelou declared, "I'm not a writer who teaches, I'm a teacher who writes. But I had to work at Wake Forest to know that." Maya Angelou once remarked in an interview, "I see myself as a very interested person. I've never been bored in my life." With all she accomplished in her lifetime, including famously speaking at President Bill Clinton's inauguration, it's impossible to see how she could have found time to be bored. Regardless of the troubles she'd face in her life, Angelou remained impressively productive, writing 7 autobiographies and publishing the final volume in 2013 at the age of 85. In addition to teaching and writing, Angelou remained politically and socially active, campaigning for Hillary Clinton in the 2008 Democratic primary and Barack Obama in the general election. In 2010, Angelou donated her personal papers and memorabilia to the New York Public Library's Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture in Harlem, saying, "I've always wanted my papers to be at the Schomburg. It's a magnificent depository of all the information about the African American experience. I'm grateful that it exists so that all the children, Black and white, Asian, Spanish-speaking, Native Americans, and Aleutian, can know there is a place where they can go and find the truth of the people's history." Maya Angelou passed away on May 28, 2014, but her legacy continues to inspire others through her impressive body of work and a life of triumphing over tragedy. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about your favorite stuff are coming soon. Subscribe to
Very, very amazing woman. And with every single thing that she faced from the beginning of her life and things with her loved ones, injustices that were going on at different decades of her life, she was still able to continue to be active and productive. And Maya Angelou, from the poems, directing, the dancing, civil rights activist, meeting several icons in her time: Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, President Clinton, Barack Obama, Oprah, so many, Langston Hughes, so many amazing people were a part of this woman's life. And so many people were touched by her, and she was touched by them as well. And she never struck me as a person who didn't want to take pain and make it into something positive. And she is definitely someone who has touched my life in lots of ways. There are many of her quotes that I use. The catalyst for being able to celebrate Black History Month here on the show: when you know better, you do better. That is a quote from the great Maya Angelou. And basically what that means is some people do things because they don't know a different way or a better way. Once you allow yourself to get the knowledge, gain the wisdom, and apply it in areas of your life that you felt stuck in, or you just simply did not know, then once you receive that, you're able to move past it and present yourself better. And that can go for so many aspects of your life. But that quote came from Maya Angelou. She faced so many troubles throughout her life, but she still remained active. And her life is a roadmap for people coming up behind her. And there's so many ways that you're able to relate to her in humble beginnings, relate to her in making leaps and bounds amidst tragedy, taking, lemons and making lemonade. She didn't allow herself to get lost in hurt. She could have done it so many times. She could have been a victim. But not only was she a survivor, she was a productive member of society. I think it's important when we see things that's happened in the past, things that have touched our history, it's important to understand the overcoming, the surviving of it all, the lesson learned in it, how you can use a tragedy and make it something greater. And she didn't speak for 5 years, but when she did speak, she had so much to say. She never struck me as a victim in anything that I've seen. I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings, and Still I Rise, any of the writings, any of the material that she did, I never saw her being a victim. I saw her being a realist, and I saw her being someone who wanted to promote change, someone who wanted to promote a different way of doing things. And it's very important that we see things as an opportunity to grow, an opportunity to do something different, an opportunity to do something better. And Maya Angelou's life definitely stood for that. She always had a smile on her face. Her eyes always glowed. She always had a way of making whatever it was turn out to be something good. And she touched so many people's lives in so many different areas. A true legend, a true role model, someone who is the epitome of positivity in Black history. So thank you guys so much for tuning in for another edition of Positive Tea with Fee, Black History Month Part 2. And you guys have a wonderful week. Thanks for the support, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.